Hi, my name is AK, and Sisters in the Round is dedicated to fostering an inclusive and empowering community within the theater industry, specifically for intergenerational Black women. Its vision extends beyond traditional professional spaces and aims to create a vibrant community playground where informal and casual conversations can flourish. And as I mentioned, my name is AK. I'm a playwright and artist, and today I'm here in the round with Pearl Cleage, and who is also a playwright, an artist, and currently the artist in residence at the Alliance Theater. I'm so excited to be here today with you, and we'll jump into our conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you as well.
Wonderful. I'd love to start just with talking about like how you found your way to playwriting, just what your journey has been. I know it's like been widely, published and everything, but I'd love to hear from you, like what brought you to this craft.
I think actually I had a great advantage. I grew up the daughter of a minister who was a great speaker, very charismatic speaker. So I was very aware of the power of the spoken word because I used to watch my dad on Sunday morning just break down really, really complicated ideas for people who were hardworking, people who had just come to church to get some spiritual guidance. So that it was really a part of something that I always admired in my father, that he could talk about very complex things in a very conversational, down-to-earth way with people. And I think that's part of what led me to really want to not just have words on paper, but to actually work in an art form where you hear the words, where you hear the stories, all of that. And then I had the great, wonderful experience of my mother taking me to see Raisin in the Sun, the national touring company for the Negro Ensemble Company. And I was about 11 years old. And the play had been in New York, but I had never seen it because I was in Detroit. And we went to see it, and it was packed. I mean, a theater full of Black people. I mean, just like packed like this. And it was winter in Detroit. So we all had these big coats on and all of that. It was freezing outside. And once the play started, none of that made a bit of difference. We were all in that story immediately. And when the final moment, when she takes that little plant and she's going to the neighborhood where we know, the younger family is going to have a hard way to go. The people in the theater, including me, we jumped up, we screamed, we hollered, we clapped, we stayed on our feet for about 15 minutes. And I hoped maybe if we kept it up, they would come back and do it again. But of course they didn't. But I walked out into the freezing night with my mother, and I said, that's the kind of plays, I want to write plays like that. And my mother said, well, then you should do it, which I think is the most wonderful thing a parent can ever say when a child confesses a dream that might seem to be unrealistic, to say, well, then do it. If that's what you want to do it. And I felt that from then on, that what I wanted to do was to write plays that could make the audiences that I was writing for jump up and holler for 15 minutes because they wanted to see it again.
Absolutely. Wow. That's so wonderful. What is the relationship like? How do you think about the relationship to like community when you could you talk about two community spaces that really informed how you became a playwright? I'm curious, like, how do you think about community now versus how you thought about it then? How has that transformed over your career?
Well, I think I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood on the west side of Detroit. Then I went to Howard University, so I was in an all-Black neighborhood in D.C. Then I moved to Atlanta. I was in Southwest Atlanta, all-Black neighborhood there. So that I was always working as a Black artist in front of Black audiences with other Black people. When I graduated from college, there was a vibrant, thriving network of Black theaters all over this country. So that I sent my plays to all of these theaters, like 25, 30 theaters saying, I'm a playwright. I think you should do my play. I think you would love it. And a lot of them actually sent back and said, we would love to do the play, but we don't have any money. So then I had to talk about, well, you do work somewhere, you do keep the lights on. So how about $10? Can you give the playwright $10 and 2 copies of a program? Because I was trying to build a portfolio that I could show people and say, no, I am a working playwright. I also wanted to be a part of helping small Black cultural institutions understand that you have to pay the writer. If it all starts with the story and the playwright, you have to figure out a way to pay the playwright something. $5 ends up whatever it is. But I had the advantage of being able to work in front of Black people, so that I never had that kind of unease, discomfort that I hear from many young Black playwrights who have never had a chance to work in front of a Black audience, who grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't an all Black neighborhood, who went to college at places where there were not a lot of Black people, and then lived in places where they were finding theaters that were not necessarily deeply rooted in community. And I think that's a real problem, because then you end up, you're not sure who you're writing for. You're not sure who you're writing about. You're not sure how much you have to explain, what you can say, what you can't say. And I'm in residence now at the Alliance Theater, which is not by any stretch of the imagination a small Black community theater. But I took with me all of that experience and all of that clarity about what it was I was trying to do. And I brought an audience with me because I had been working in theater for a long time. So a lot of the people that came to see my plays at the Alliance had never been there before. And they were coming there to see a Black play by a Black playwright. And sometimes they were surprised when they would get to the Alliance and be like, oh, okay, this isn't for us. And I would say, no, it is. I invited you. If anything happens that's not good, you tell them the playwright invited you. And come and see. But it's a challenge, I think, to be able to figure out who you're writing for and then find a way to get in front of them with it. Because if you're trying to write about a group of people and your audience doesn't include that group of people, then it's going to be very difficult for you. And I think that's true for Black playwrights, for any playwright that finds the audience completely different, because then you're explaining, you're kind of doing missionary work. You're saying, look, this is how we feel, as opposed to an audience that embraces it and knows, because we all know the same feelings. When that audience I was in stood up for Raising in the Sun, we all understood that family. We were different economic levels, but we understood that family. We understood the problem of racism in housing, in everything, in jobs, so that we brought with us the sensibility that let us embrace those characters without hesitation. And I think that it's difficult and extremely challenging to be a playwright and to find yourself not able to plug into where the audience that looks like you is going to the theater.
Absolutely. Such a transformative feeling. I just finished a workshop here where I'm from in Pittsburgh, and it's just like, it's so wonderful to hear, to have audiences who know what I'm referring to, like Black audiences in this city who are coming and being like, I remember this, I remember that. And that feeling is like one of a kind. So yeah, thank you.
Because it makes you feel like you're communicating in the way you want to without having to say whatever it is you say, comma, explanation, comma, explanation, then back to the story, which throws off the rhythm and doesn't let us as the playwrights have the pleasure of offering the work the way it arrives, because we're always editing and trying to make sure that people who are not aware of some things will understand the joke. We'll get the story. I remember I wrote a book once, and I sent the manuscript to my editor in New York. And the woman, the lead character in the book, was a hairdresser, and she was talking about somebody's kitchen. And my editor, who was a very nice young white woman from Manhattan, said, "What is a kitchen?" I said, it's the back of your hair right there. And, Black women were always very conscious of the kitchen and all that. She was like, "Oh, wow, you should explain that." And I said, "No, I'm not explaining that, because any Black woman who reads it, if I'm explaining what the kitchen is, she's saying, well, I know Pearl is not writing for me, because she should know I know what a kitchen is." I said, you have to think of it as if you were reading a book by a Chinese author and something occurred that you didn't understand. You as the reader have to figure that out. You have to go figure out what that is. That's not the responsibility of the writer to explain to people who are outside of that group what the nuances are. And you have to make it accessible. I don't mean that, but I mean that there is a danger of losing the audience for whom that story came forward, If you're explaining to people who don't know what a kitchen is, what a black hairdresser is doing with a kitchen. I'm sorry I didn't get to see the show about the braiding that was just on Broadway about the African hair braiding. But yeah, just to see how that was presented and how audiences embraced it, because people seem to really like it, which is great, because hair is such a thing for us. But not just African American women, but all over the world, hair is like a big thing. So it would have been interesting. Did you see that show?
I did. Yeah, I saw it. I think it was interesting because it was like you're just dropped into the world of that play. Like there's no kind of like, I mean, you're and if you know an African hair braiding salon, you know what it is. It's familiar to you. They have the Nollywood movies playing on the screen.
Yes.
That kind of thing. It's very like if you know it, right? And the audience is kind of caught into that. So that was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you think about building audience? What is your relationship as a playwright to the work of like getting the people that you need into the theater? Like, how do you position yourself when you're in a process in that way?
Well, I've lived in Atlanta for a long time, so that when I came to the Alliance, which is where I am now, I already had an audience that had been a part of my life when I was working at Just Us Theater, and ran Just Us Theater for 10 years, which was an independent Black theater. But what I try to do is to stay involved in the community that I live in, to not just go in the theater and stay in the theater all the time, but to actually go out to other things, go to meetings, go to demonstrations, go to commemorative events where they're, in Atlanta, we're always dedicating something to somebody. So it's like to be a part of that. But to talk to your friends and neighbors. If you have a church, talk to the people at the church. I remember when I first got to the Alliance, there was a big thing in the paper. And some of my neighbors, I still live in Southwest Atlanta. And some of my neighbors were like, "Oh, that's so great. It's such a big theater and you deserve it." Because it's funny. African-American people are often really happy that you get invited into these spaces that they perceive, define, and articulate as white spaces. But they're proud of you for getting there. And so I said, "Oh, thank you so much. Are you going to come there and see my plays?" And they'd be like, "Well, I've never been there and I don't know. What would I have to wear?" So that they were proud of me for doing it, but they didn't understand that I couldn't do it if they didn't continue to come the same way they had come when I was working at Just Us. So that's when I had to really start saying things like, "No, it does belong to us if we go there. I'm inviting you. You can come there. It's fine. You don't have to think of this as somebody else's space." We have worked hard to be a part of all of these spaces. So we have to stop thinking of these things as a white theater and a Black theater and a this theater and a that theater. And I really had to think about that just in terms of my own relationship to my community when I decided to be a part of the work at the Alliance and to be the playwright in residence there. And I wasn't going to do it because I had never worked in a theater like that. And I was like, this is not good. I am an independent Black playwright. I can't go work at a big white theater. And I was fussing. And my husband listened to me for a while. And then he said, I think you're looking at this all wrong. So I said, well, then tell me how I should be looking at it. I was a little indignant, but I said, okay, tell me what you think. And he said, you should think of it as you're a great American playwright and you're going to work at a great American theater. And I was like, okay, I don't really think of myself as an American playwright. I think of myself as a Black playwright. I didn't even think of myself as an American citizen until Barack Obama and Michelle Obama moved into the White House with 2 little Black girls. And then I said, well, okay, I guess I have to embrace it, because there they are. But I think the idea of thinking of myself as an American playwright and really trying to think deeply about what that meant has allowed me to understand that I have a right to be an American playwright. I am an American playwright. This is the only country I got, even though I weep and hold my head about it sometimes. It's the only one I've got. So what does that mean? Am I allowed to talk about the totality of the American theater, or am I only allowed to talk about the Black folks in the theater? Am I allowed to think about these institutions as institutions that can be transformed by me as a person coming in, even though it wasn't built for me? And that continues to be a challenge for me. And his exercise to me, my husband, was to because he wasn't raised a Black nationalist separatist like I was. So he laughs at me sometimes like, you just got here. You're like an immigrant child. You don't even know this is America now. Think of yourself every time you get ready to say Black or white, say American instead, and see if it makes a difference to the sentence, if it makes a difference to what you're talking about. And I did that as an exercise for myself when I first got to the Alliance. And it was transformative because it allowed me to think of myself as a part of an institution that had not been built to welcome people like me. But now I'm there, and it's part of the revolution for me to be there, to use those resources, to write plays and put them on in that space. So I still consider it to be really radical work for playwrights to inhabit these spaces. And I think we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, when there was a lot of upheaval in some of these big Lord theaters. And all of that about we see you white American theater. What does that mean? And how do we transform that feeling into something that supports the work that we want to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do you imagine if these theaters were, I guess I'm curious, like both in the futures of Black theaters, the like the theaters that you like originated in and everything, and the futures of theaters that are considered white theaters or are considered theaters that like occupy a different space. What do you feel like is a future that would be the most radical, like the most ideal future for those spaces?
Well, I think that there have to be partnerships between culturally I was going to say culturally specific, but I hate all those terms because they still put white at the center of it.
Huh?
So I think there has to be a way to make partnerships between great, big, economically secure, or were many of them economically secure theaters with predominantly white leadership and audience, with theaters that might be smaller, that might be based in communities that have not supported those bigger institutions. But I think that those partnerships are just the beginning. These spaces, these giant Lord theaters, are unsustainable in terms of just how do you pay the heat bill at a theater like that? How do you pay the air conditioning bill at theaters like that? So that I think that the whole idea of building giant institutions that take rich people to maintain them has to be rethought. Because these theaters were not built to be based in small communities of working class people. These theaters were built to glorify and put forward wealthy upper middle class and upper class income white audiences and white people. And especially, I mean, in a place like Atlanta, the place where we work every day, now the theater has been torn out and we have a new space. But that theater was designed during segregation, so that by the time it opened, the rules had changed. That was 1968. But when it was designed, the balcony was awful. It was out of sight. The pitch of it was terrible because that's where the Black folks were supposed to be. So Susan Booth, who was our artistic director, raised the money to tear out all the old stuff and build out a brand new theater. I complimented her and said, that's really a good thing, because that is the last vestige of those Confederate ghosts that had that theater built so that I couldn't see the show. And she was really kind of taken aback by it, but she understood what I was talking about and understood that that's the challenge that we're up against. It's not like, let's do a Black play. Let's bring in a Black playwright. Let's hire some Black actors. It's like, no, we have to look at what these institutions came about to do and whether or not that's still the mission that they accept and still the mission that the city around them accepts. Because many of the cities around these big Lord theaters are different now. They're much more diverse than they used to be. So how does this big giant institution that needs a way to survive, needs a way to pay that light bill, how do they do it? Who can they invite in? What kind of programming can they invite in? And who is going to make those decisions? Who is going to make the decisions about an audience? You know, it's still craziness if you have people who are not of the audience they're trying to reach, talking about how to get to that audience. It's like you need some people in this room where those discussions are going on who are of that audience. Otherwise, it's crazy. You know, how do we deal with Puerto Rican Americans? How do we deal with Mexican Americans? How do we deal with African Americans? It's like, who is the we? Who is trying to decide that we has to be all of us together? And it's going to be a mess. It's going to be people crying and arguing and walking out and throwing things and all of that stuff that we've seen happen. But it has to happen, because if these institutions cannot come into the 21st century and what America looks like in the 21st century, they're going to die. And they should, because if they can't be a part of what's going on now, as we see fascism marching up the street, if they can't be a part of holding up a hand saying, no, we will not live that way, then there's no point in trying to fight to save them. Let's burn those buildings and make something new happen. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Symbolically burn the buildings, of course. I'm not actually advocating burning any of these buildings, but I'm about burning down the things, the class privilege and the economic privilege that is often ingrained in these places, to say you don't have to work that way. You don't have to have a theater that only reflects that. Look how interesting and messy America is. Let's see if we can put that on the stage and make it something that people can learn about each other, embrace each other, all of those things.
Absolutely. What is the play? What is your favorite your favorite play that you've ever written, and why, and what was the process of that story, and how did you find your way into that story?
I think and it's like asking the parent to choose among the children, who's your favorite baby. But yeah. I think that Blues for an Alabama Sky might be my favorite of my plays, because I feel like that's the play where I learned how to write a play. I had wonderful teachers, playwriting teachers. They were all working Black playwrights. I mean, I had Owen Dodson, I had Ted Shine, I had Paul Carter Harrison, I had Carlton and Barbara Millette, and they were all wonderful. But they never gave us a book that says, this is kind of how you can think about craft. Their idea was more, if you want to write plays, you should write plays. You should go see plays. You should experience plays, which is wonderful. But you also need a guidebook about craft, or I did. And I had been writing plays. I had had plays produced and all of that. And a friend of mine gave me Lejos Egri's book, 1946, The Art of Dramatic Writing. And I was like, wow, this is like before I was born, this book came out. Let me see if there's something in here that I can use. And it actually changed my life as a playwright, because he was talking about craft. And even though I didn't agree with every single thing that he had to say, he was able to guide me through the process that I still use to this day. I reread that book every time I write a play, because it made me understand that it can be you can figure out what the steps are without having to start from scratch every time, without having to have those moments of, I think I have a great idea, but where do I start with it? Where do I start? And even getting to that idea, I read an interview with you where you were talking about when you start writing, you kind of just like doodle things and write things and any phrase you want and all of that. And I said, yep, I recognize that. Yeah, where it's like, I'm trying to find it. What am I talking about? And that doesn't get, that part doesn't get easier. But the part of once you get it got amazingly more productive and enjoyable for me. I had a firmer grasp about craft. So when I look at that play, I can see that I understood better what I was doing than I had in some of the plays I had written before, which doesn't mean I don't still love those plays, but there's moments where I say, I could have fixed it. I could have made that better. But I think that's always dangerous when you go back 20 years after and try to fix the play. It's like pulling a thread on a sweater. If you fix one line, then the whole thing is going to be gone. It's like, no, write the next one.
Absolutely.
Write the next.
I recently was describing the process of rewriting. Sometimes it feels like the writing process feels like a deeply embodied practice, whereas like rewriting is very much like a brain practice. And then sometimes it feels like when I'm like, I can get too in the weeds with rewriting because I'm like trying to like fix something that I initially had the impulse for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Totally. What's your favorite piece that you've written?
My favorite, this is a hard question. I don't know why I asked it. I have a play that is called AMANI that feels really special to me. It is about like freedom dreaming and this father who builds a rocket ship and tries to go to outer space. He gets out of prison and he decides that the world can't contain his his child if they decide to go to space. That's one that I love a lot. And then also this play I'm working on right now, actually, that is about this amusement park where I'm from Pittsburgh. And there's an amusement park here that is at the edge of the river. My family would go there every single summer. And the play is kind of like tracking his family's history in the park and the ways that they like rest, like it's a place of like incredible pleasure and joy and roller coasters and experience, but then also it was segregated during the early years of the park, and also had an enormous pool that Black folks weren't allowed in. Just a lot of history that like I'm trying to wrestle with these ancestors in the park and also the characters in the present. So yeah, the two plays.
Yeah. It's funny when people talk to me about writer's block, and you don't sound like a person who deals with writer's block. I don't really have writer's block. I have the opposite problem. There's so many stories. I mean, just that you're talking about with an amusement park. It's like, wow, that's such a great visual, theatrical idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of the time when people are talking about writer's block, it's back to that craft thing when they have a big idea, but they don't know how to make that idea accessible and manageable chunks as a writer. So they were, 6 pages in a fever. And then it's like, okay, what now? And it's like, no, figure that out. You need a book. Look, I was so awful when I first had that book. I kept trying to thrust it on people. Read it. I swear it'll help you. You'll love it. But, some didn't.
Can you repeat the author? It's The Art of Dramatic Writing by Can you repeat the author?
It's Lajos Egri is his last name. And it's a little paperback book, and it's $10 or something like that. But I actually wore out the first copy I had. I had to get another one, and I was really indignant because the one that I had worn out has all my little notes and all that stuff in it. So I bought another one so that when this one finally does fall apart, I'll have another one waiting. But I can't get rid of the first because it has all the little stuff like, oh, this is what that means, and I get it now, and things like that, where you can remember that you didn't understand and then you did. Because Absolutely. I think that's a big part of being a writer, I think, is just realizing that you can do this because every time is new. It's like the thing about the terror of the blank page. You have to start from scratch, and it's a people ask me, do you go see every production of your plays? And I'm very fortunate that I couldn't possibly do that. But I also learned early on that going to see your own work over and over and over and over can really be intimidating as you're trying to come up with the next thing, trying to fill up that new page, because everything is going to be new. The idea is new. The characters are new. What you're feeling at that moment, the thing that made you feel like you wanted to spend however long you had to spend to write that last one is not the same impetus that's going to be there for the first one. So I think part of what our challenge always as writers is to say, you can do this, to self-soothe. You did this before. This is what you do. Sit down, drink a cup of coffee, draw some doodles, figure out what you need to do to figure out what you're thinking about now. And I think when you are being commissioned to do things and working at theaters where they want to do your work, the danger is that you start leaning into what they think you should be writing or what they would like to see you write, rather than being able to sit by yourself and say, what am I thinking? What is driving me crazy? Because if it's driving you crazy, it's probably driving some other people crazy too. So think about that. Get to that point. Not what are they going to pay me to write? Because it's, that's nice when people pay you a lot of money to write, but it gets old really fast if you're writing stuff you don't like. Then you have to tell your friends, okay, I know it's a big play, but don't go see it because it's not very good. You want to be in that position. You always want to say, you got to go see it. I got something new. You must go see what I'm
saying. Absolutely. I find it really important just to have those moments, just to be with like just what I'm experiencing in the present, as opposed to like trying to think about other things. And I find that every play is teaching me how to write in a new way. Like every play is teaching me what it needs to be as I'm working on it. And also that I struggle with like naming, like describing what I'm going to write. I just have to do it as opposed to trying to describe it. I think that's something I've run into as well.
Do you outline and all of that in advance? I'm an outlining person, but I have many friends who are like, that would kill my creativity. I can't do it. They kind of just start in and go for it.
Yeah, it depends on the play, really. I have a play that is an adaptation of Julius Caesar, but it's about Black women and non-binary people who are trying to plan a revolt on a plantation. And that play, because it had that adaptation structure, I did a lot of outlining in advance. But usually I will just have an ending image. One of my favorite mentors, Tarell McCraney, he always talked about like an ending image. If you have that, you can keep moving towards that.
Mhm.
And that feels really, really relevant to me because sometimes I don't know where a play is going to take me, but I know it lands with this image. Like with the last amusement park play, I know that the two characters end up on a roller coaster and they're at the end and they're screaming and they're there. But I had no idea how I was going to get there. So yeah,
That's a great idea, though, to know what the end will be. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. What is your outlining process like? Is it like is it very detailed? Is it just like a sort of sketch of the story, or how do you work in that way?
I start with the characters. I hate to plot things. I'm not good at plotting. I just, it's like I would really love to just write a play where the characters just talk. They just come to the edge of the stage and talk. But
Yes.
you can't do that. You have to have something. They're talking about something.
Mm-hmm.
So I start with characters. I do a lot of character work. I have a chart that I use that's got like 30 questions on it that asks you about this character, and it's everything from the obvious things like the name, the where they live, that kind of thing. But then it asks you questions like, what's her favorite color? What kind of music does she like? And when I first started using this chart, I was like, I do not need to know this child's favorite color. That is not a part of the play. And I realized that what it's doing, if I answer all of them, is at the end of that, it's no longer me pretending to be the character. It
Mm-hmm.
actually helps you create someone who is not you. Because since all these things start in our heads, we're all at the beginning pretending to be this one and that one until we find out who they really are. And this
Mm-hmm.
chart is very helpful for that. And it also asks questions that kind of gently take me into plot. What is her problem? How does it get worse? Who are her friends? What's her mama do for a living? Things like that. To where it's, when you get to what's her problem and how's it going to get worse, that's a plot question, which would make me nervous if I started there. But if I start with what's her favorite color, that means I get to sit around and think, does she like orange? Does she like purple? Does she care about color at all? What does she eat? So that I can go through the grocery store and say, oh, she does not like avocado. She likes rutabagas or whatever it is. But to make the people real, and then they kind of are how I find the plot. What it
Absolutely.
is. Yeah.
Yes. I have one final question because I know we're coming up on our time here. And I could talk to you for hours and hours. I
I
really
know.
hope
I feel like I can't wait for you to get to Atlanta so we can do this.
person. My last question is just what has kept you returning to writing? What has always brought you back?
I love writing. I love the process of it. I have many friends who are writers, and a lot of them love the final product, but they hate the process. I love
Mm-hmm.
the process. I love finding these characters. I
Mm-hmm.
love struggling with these plots. I really like the process, and I love theater because it is such a group-based thing. And having grown up in a movement family, an activist family, working in an art form where what you're ultimately doing is calling your community together to say, I have a story to tell you. And it's going to make you understand things better. It's going to make you feel differently. It's going to come together. And I love that feeling. So that it's, the process is wonderful. Once it's on the stage, I love to see all of that. And I also understand really deeply that writing is the way I understand the world. And when I finish a big project, I always say, I'm not going to write anything for 6 months. I'm just going to, whatever I think I would do. And that lasts for about a week. And I
Yeah.
can't stand it, and it's like my family is like, please write something. You are so terrible when you're not writing. So it
Mm.
really does help me navigate the world. And I'd really love it. Plus, there's the practical side. It's too late for me to get a straight job now. What could I possibly do other than this? So I think it's a great life. I think theater is a wonderful life, and I love talking to young people who are doing it. People like you who are committed to it and doing it. Is that Lorraine Hansberry on your earrings? Who is that on your earrings?
It's Audre Lorde, actually.
Lord, I knew it was one of my sisters on there. I said, wait a minute, is it Childress? Is it? So I've been trying to look at it. I love Audre Lorde. I
Yes.
mean, I love her. I remember when I was a young poet and I was editing a magazine and she sent me a lovely personal note, and it was like, oh my God, I kept it for forever. I still have it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing where we need them around us. We need to feel them with us, and I think they are. They're so happy we're doing this work. They really
Absolutely. I love those moments when that is clear to me, whether it's like my grandmothers or my ancestors or people that I admire, like Lorraine Hansberry or Audre Lorde, and I feel like this sense of oh, this is purpose. This is what I'm like on the path towards, or hopefully on the path towards. Wonderful. This has been so wonderful. I hope we get to meet in person. I really would love that. And
I look forward to it. We'll make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for tuning in to Sisters in the Round. Please tune into the next episode. Really want to lift up the labor and work of the organizers of this podcast. I think it's a tremendous space. So thank you so much, and have a nice day.